6 dog tags hung from a shattered pine branch. January 9th, 1945. Belgium. Sergeant Hayes counted them twice. 4th Platoon walked into an ambush yesterday. Only Hayes escaped. Battalion wrote them off. 23 hours missing. Sub-zero temperatures. Command said rescue would cost more lives. But Hayes knew the old mining tunnel. If one man made it there, he was alive. Waiting. Hayes promised families he'd bring them home. 3 volunteers stood behind him. Mathematics said suicide. Brotherhood said mandatory. The weight of those dog tags haunted Hayes. Each metal disc represented failure. 12 soldiers trusted his judgment. 12 families would receive telegrams. Hayes had written death notifications before. North Africa taught him that burden. Sicily reinforced it. But yesterday was different. Yesterday 4th Platoon ceased to exist. 24 hours earlier, everything had seemed routine. Standard reconnaissance patrol through forest east of Malmedy. 16 men, map German positions, report enemy movements. Return by 1700 hours. Simple mission they'd executed dozens of times. Hayes was careful, experienced. 31 years old, ancient by infantry standards. He'd survived Kasserine Pass when green American forces met professional Wehrmacht. That disaster taught lessons written in American blood. Think ahead, plan escape routes, never assume safety. His men trusted that experience, followed him through brutal winter fighting. He'd kept casualties lower than other platoons. That trust was everything. Sergeant Thomas Hayes had joined the army in early 1942. Enlisting felt inevitable after Pearl Harbor. He'd been working construction in Chicago, building skyscrapers, good pay, union benefits. But his wife Margaret had died of tuberculosis in 1941, 26 years old. Gone in 3 months. Hayes was left hollow. Work felt meaningless. Life felt empty. When war came, he enlisted. Needed purpose, needed distraction, needed something beyond grief. Basic training at Fort Benning revealed aptitude for leadership. Instructors noticed he stayed calm under pressure, made quick decisions. Other men naturally followed him. He made corporal in 6 months. The army sent him to North Africa with the 1st Infantry Division. February 1943. His first taste of combat came at Kasserine Pass. That battle was catastrophic. American forces were inexperienced, poorly coordinated. The German counterattack was professional, brutal, overwhelming. Hayes' company took 50% casualties in 2 days. He saw friends die, saw officers make mistakes that killed good soldiers, saw chaos and terror and how quickly training evaporated under real fire. But he also learned terrain mattered, learned to anticipate enemy moves, learned that keeping men alive required constant vigilance and refusing to take unnecessary risks. Sicily reinforced those lessons. Every village was fortress. Every road was mined. Germans defended skillfully, made Americans pay for every yard. Hayes made sergeant there. His squad took casualties but fewer than others. Officers noticed, recognized Hayes had instincts that kept soldiers breathing. By September 1944, the army sent him to Belgium, assigned him to 4th Platoon, made him responsible for 16 lives. The men tested him initially. New sergeant, older guy, trying to prove himself. But Hayes didn't need proving. Just did his job, made smart decisions, brought everyone home night after night. The platoon learned quickly. Hayes wouldn't waste lives, wouldn't take glory risks, wouldn't get them killed for medals or officer approval. That trust built slowly through October and November, through dozens of patrols and firefights, through brutal Hürtgen forest fighting, where every day brought death. Hayes lost 4 men during those months. Each one hurt. Each felt like personal failure, but 4 from 16 was success by infantry standards. Private First Class Raymond Chen joined Hayes's squad in September, 22 years old. Sacramento, California. Smart kid, Quick with numbers, good radio operator, reliable under fire, Chen talked constantly about home, about family orange groves, about sunshine and warmth, about his fiancée Nancy waiting in California. He'd bought an engagement ring before shipping out, planned wedding for when war ended, had his future mapped perfectly. Hayes wanted that future for Chen, wanted all his men to live long enough for weddings and children and normal lives. Corporal Jake Mitchell transferred to 4th Platoon in October. Combat medic, 24 years old. Bremen, Ohio. Pharmacy background. Mitchell knew medicine, knew how to keep wounded soldiers alive until they reached proper hospitals. He'd already saved 3 men, treated sucking chest wounds under fire, extracted shrapnel, administered morphine. Mitchell was quiet, serious, carried visible weight from every soldier he couldn't save, but he kept working, kept trying, kept believing he could help. Hayes respected that dedication, trusted Mitchell completely with his men's lives. Private Robert Henderson was from Georgia, 20 years old, farm boy, strong as ox, could carry twice what normal men managed, good-natured despite terrible conditions, always smiling, always finding something to laugh about. Henderson's optimism was infectious. When artillery rained down and temperatures dropped and casualties mounted, Henderson would crack jokes, would remind everyone they were breathing. We're together, we're alive. That positivity kept morale functional, kept 4th Platoon from collapsing into despair. Private Louis Marcus came from Philadelphia. 23, sharpshooter, best rifleman in the platoon, could hit targets at 500 yards, could pick off German officers and machine gunners with first shots. Hayes positioned Marcus strategically, used his skills to cover retreats and support advances. Marcus was cocky about his shooting, but earned the right. He delivered consistently, kept Germans pinned, kept his brothers alive. That counted for everything. The rest of 4th Platoon filled out with solid soldiers. Private Williams from Detroit, Corporal Davis from Boston, Private Anderson from Texas, Private Torres from New Mexico, Private Morrison from Oregon, Private Johnson from Virginia, young men from across America, factory workers and farmers and college students, all thrown into war, all learning to survive, all trusting Hayes to keep them safe. 12 more men whose names Hayes had memorized, whose hometowns he knew, whose families he'd promised to protect their sons. That responsibility crushed him sometimes, but also gave purpose. These men needed him. The patrol yesterday had seemed routine. Intelligence reported Germans withdrawing from sector, minimal enemy activity expected. 4th Platoon tasked with confirming withdrawal, making sure Germans weren't setting traps. Standard reconnaissance. They'd done this dozens of times. Should have been boring day. Walk through snow. See nothing interesting. Report negative contact. Come home for hot food and sleep. Just another day in endless infantry grind. Hayes had briefed the platoon carefully before departure. Standard safety protocols. Maintain proper spacing. Watch for tripwires. Stay alert for ambush indicators. Report anything suspicious immediately. Don't take unnecessary risks. If you see Germans, observe and report. Don't engage unless forced. Our job is intelligence, not fighting. Come home alive. Those were his priorities always. Keep men safe. Complete mission, return intact. Simple objectives, achievable if everyone stayed sharp. They'd moved out at noon. 16 men in tactical column. Hayes led from front, setting pace, checking terrain, making navigation decisions, reading the forest for threats. Chen followed carrying the SCR 300 radio, 30 pounds of equipment but essential, their lifeline to battalion command. Mitchell came next with medical supplies, 20 pounds of bandages and morphine and instruments. Marcus positioned mid-column where his rifle could support either direction. Henderson near rear with his strength available for carrying wounded, the rest spread evenly. Proper patrol formation. Textbook infantry tactics. Everything by regulations. Everything safe. The forest was beautiful that day. Fresh snow covered everything. Pine trees heavy with white, sunlight filtering through branches. Almost peaceful. Easy to forget this was combat zone. Easy to relax. That was dangerous. Hayes kept everyone alert, reminded them constantly, stay sharp, watch your sectors, don't bunch up, maintain spacing. The repetition was necessary. Complacency killed soldiers faster than enemy bullets. At 13:30 they'd reached phase line Bravo, halfway point of patrol route. Hayes called brief halt. Let men rest 5 minutes. Drink water, adjust equipment, eat chocolate bars. Small break that maintained energy. Chen radioed Battalion, reported position, reported negative contact. Everything normal. Battalion acknowledged, told them to continue mission. Expected full report by 1700 hours. They resumed movement at 1340. Another 2 hours of patrolling ahead, then back to American lines. Hot food, warm bunkers, sleep. Everyone was thinking about that, about being done, about surviving another day. That thinking was dangerous. Made men careless. Hayes tried to keep them focused, tried to maintain alertness, but he felt it too. The assumption of safety, the belief that today would be like yesterday and the day before, routine patrol. Nothing happens. Go home. That assumption would kill them. At 1400 hours exactly, the Germans opened fire. 3 MG-42 machine guns simultaneously, perfectly coordinated. Overlapping fields of fire. The ambush was professional, textbook Wehrmacht tactics. Hayes dove for cover instantly. Combat reflexes saved him. He rolled behind fallen log as bullets tore through air where he'd been standing. The sound was overwhelming. MG-42s fired 1,200 rounds per minute. 3 guns meant 3,600 rounds. The air became solid metal. Deadly. Inescapable. The platoon scattered immediately. Training took over. Men found whatever cover existed, returned fire blindly, tried to locate enemy positions, but the German crossfire was perfect. Interlocking, inescapable. Hayes saw men falling, saw his soldiers hit before they could reach cover, saw Private Williams go down, saw Corporal Davis collapse, saw the patrol disintegrating under concentrated fire. Hayes tried to organize response, yelled orders over gunfire, directed fire at muzzle flashes, attempted to establish defensive perimeter, but German fire was too intense, too accurate. His men were pinned completely, unable to maneuver, unable to retreat, caught in tactical nightmare with no good options. This was professional ambush. Germans had waited, had positioned perfectly, had caught Americans in killing ground with no escape. Then grenades started falling. German potato mashers thrown with practiced accuracy. The distinctive whistle, then explosion, then screaming. Hayes saw 3 men go down from single grenade, saw Private Torres torn apart, saw Private Morrison thrown against tree, saw blood and snow mixing. This wasn't fight. This was execution. His men needed to withdraw immediately, or everyone would die. Fall back, Hayes screamed. His voice was raw, desperate. Rally Point Alpha. Move. Rally Point Alpha was defensive position 200 yards back. Small hill with good fields of fire. If platoon could reach it, they might establish defense. Might call artillery support. Might survive, but reaching it meant running through open ground while Germans poured fire. Hayes knew it was suicide. Knew most men would die trying. But staying was certain death. At least retreat offered slim chance. He saw Private Johnson try. Sprint from cover toward rally point. Made it 20 yards before German bullets cut him down. Johnson spun. Fell. Didn't move again. Hayes saw Corporal Davis attempt same run. Made it 30 yards. German machine gun found him. Davis collapsed into snow, red spreading underneath him. The withdrawal was impossible. German fire too concentrated. Anyone who ran died. Anyone who stayed died. There were no good choices remaining. Hayes made decision. He would cover withdrawal, provide suppressing fire while men tried to escape. It was probably suicide. But if even few soldiers made it out, sacrifice would matter. He pulled 3 grenades from belt, threw them toward German positions, used explosions to mask movement to better firing position, found slight depression that offered marginal protection, set up his Thompson submachine gun, 30-round magazine. He fired in short controlled bursts, 3 to 5 rounds, kept German heads down, created brief windows when his men might run. "Go!" he yelled between bursts. "Move! Get out! Rally point Alpha!" Some men ran. Hayes saw Chen sprint toward rally point. Radio bouncing on his back. Chen made it, disappeared into trees. Hayes kept firing, saw Mitchell follow. Medical bag in one hand, rifle in other. Mitchell made it. 2 soldiers safe. Hayes kept firing, saw Henderson try. Big Georgian running hard. Made it. 3 safe. Hayes fired until Thompson clicked empty. Dropped magazine. Reached for fresh one. German fire intensified immediately. They'd been waiting for this moment. Bullets hit all around. Tall bark, kicked up snow. Hayes pressed flat. Slammed new magazine home. Came up firing again. Saw Marcus running. Sharp shooter abandoning his rifle. Just trying to survive. Marcus made it. 4 men safe. Hayes fired again. Emptied another magazine. Reloaded. His hands shook. Adrenaline and fear and desperation. He'd given his men chance. 4 had made it. Maybe more running he hadn't seen. Maybe more surviving. That had to be enough. Had to matter. He couldn't save everyone, but he'd saved some. That counted. Had to count. Hayes looked around frantically. His position was alone. Completely isolated. Couldn't see any other Americans. Just bodies scattered across snow. Just evidence of catastrophe. His platoon was destroyed. 12 men minimum were down, dead or wounded, lying in killing ground while Germans watched. Hayes couldn't help them, couldn't reach them, could barely keep himself alive. The realization hit like physical blow. He'd failed them, led them into trap, got them killed, failed to protect them, failed to honor trust, failed everything. He fired last bursts from his Thompson, then ran, sprinted through snow toward rally point. Bullets chased him, cracked past his head, hit trees beside him, kicked up snow at his feet. 200 yards felt like 2 miles. His lungs burned, heart hammered, legs pumped frantically. He expected bullets to hit any second, expected death, expected to join his men in the snow. But he kept running, kept surviving somehow, reached rally point, collapsed behind cover, gasped for air desperately. Found 4 men waiting. Chen, Mitchell, Henderson, Marcus. 4 survivors from 16 soldiers. 12 men unaccounted for. 12 friends left behind. 12 families about to receive telegrams. Hayes's chest felt crushed. This was unthinkable. This was total failure of everything he'd promised. Everything he'd believed about keeping men safe. "Where are the others?" Mitchell asked. Voice shaking, eyes wide with shock. Hayes couldn't answer, couldn't form words, just shook his head slowly. 12 men. 12 soldiers who'd trusted him that morning, who'd followed him into forest believing he'd bring them home, who died because Hayes led them into ambush, because he'd missed signs, because he'd failed to predict enemy action. The weight was unbearable, crushing. He wanted to scream, wanted to punch something, wanted to go back and die with his men, rather than living with this failure. Chen got on radio immediately, called Battalion, reported contact, reported casualties, requested artillery support, requested medevac, requested anything. Battalion responded coldly. Artillery unavailable, all guns committed to main defensive line. Medevac impossible. Active combat zone. 4th Platoon should withdraw to friendly positions immediately. Abandon patrol sector. Leave dead and wounded behind. Standard procedure when situation was hopeless. That last part hit Hayes like sledgehammer. Leave his men behind. Leave soldiers who might be wounded, who might be alive, who might be waiting for rescue. Battalion was ordering him to abandon his people. The thought made him physically ill, violated everything he believed about being soldier, about being sergeant, about brotherhood. You never left anyone behind. Never. That was fundamental. That was sacred. That was what separated soldiers from murderers. We need to go back, Hayes said quietly. 4 survivors stared at him. Sarge. That's suicide, Henderson said carefully. Germans are still there, still in position. We'd never make it 50 yards. My men are back there. Our men. We can't just leave them. Battalion ordered withdrawal. Chen reminded him gently. We're supposed to fall back immediately. Hayes knew Chen was right tactically. Knew Henderson spoke truth. Knew going back was probably suicide. Knew odds were impossible. But he also knew promises mattered. Promises he'd made to his men, to their families. Promises that they'd never be left behind. That brotherhood meant something. That soldiers looked after each other. Those promises meant more than tactical logic. More than survival odds. More than battalion orders. Those promises were who he was, what he believed, why he'd taken responsibility for 16 lives in first place. I'm going back, Hayes said, stood up, checked his Thompson, counted remaining magazines. 3 left, 90 rounds, not much, but enough maybe, enough to try. You 4 withdraw, report to battalion, tell them 4th Platoon is combat ineffective. I'll recover what I can. Alone? Mitchell looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Sarge, that's not just suicide. That's stupid suicide. I made promises to those men, to their families. I keep my promises. Hayes started walking back toward ambush site. Didn't look back. Didn't want to see if others followed. This was his burden, his responsibility, his choice. He'd led those men into death. Least he could do was recover their bodies. Bring them home. Give families something to bury. That was minimum. That was obligation. That was debt he owed. God damn it, Chen muttered behind him. Then footsteps. All 4 men were following. Were refusing to let him go alone. Were choosing brotherhood over orders, over survival, over common sense. Hayes's throat tightened. These men, these soldiers. This was why brotherhood mattered. Why it was worth fighting for, worth dying for. They believed in something bigger than self-preservation. Believed in each other. That belief was everything. They moved carefully back toward ambush site, using different approach angle, staying in cover, moving tactically. German fire had stopped. Either Wehrmacht had withdrawn or they were waiting. Setting another trap, Hayes signaled his tiny group to spread out. Use maximum dispersion. Don't give Germans grouped target. Don't make it easy. They approach slowly, weapons ready, expecting contact, expecting more fighting, expecting to join the others in death. They reached killing ground. Bodies everywhere, American bodies, Hayes's men, his soldiers, 12 soldiers scattered across snow. Some were clearly dead, headshots, chest wounds. Others might be alive, might be wounded, might need help. Hayes approached nearest body, Private Williams, 20 years old, Detroit. Williams' mother had written Hayes letters, thanking him for keeping her son safe. Hayes had failed her son. Williams was dead, multiple wounds, gone before he'd hit ground probably. Hayes took his dog tags, 1 for body, 1 for graves registration, 1 for the letter Hayes would write explaining how he'd failed. They moved from body to body methodically, checked each soldier, looked for survivors, found none initially. Germans had been thorough, had finished wounded, had left nothing but corpses. Hayes felt rage building, mixed with grief, mixed with crushing guilt. 12 men, all dead, because he'd led them here, because he'd walked them into trap, because he'd failed to spot ambush. This was his fault, his failure, his burden to carry forever. Sarge. Mitchell's voice cut through Hayes's spiral. This one's alive. Hayes ran, found Mitchell kneeling beside Private Thompson, 21 years old, Kansas farm boy. Thompson was hit bad, multiple wounds. Chest, abdomen, left leg, blood everywhere. But he was breathing, unconscious but alive, barely alive, hanging by thread, but alive. One survivor from 12 men, one soldier who could still be saved, one chance to fulfill some small part of his promises. Mitchell worked frantically, opened medical kit, started treating wounds, applying pressure bandages, injecting morphine, doing everything possible with limited field supplies. He needs hospital, Mitchell said urgently. Needs surgery, but I can stabilize him. Maybe, if we move fast and he's lucky, and God decides to give us a break for once. We move, Hayes decided instantly. No question, no debate. They'd found one survivor, one man who could be brought home. Henderson and Marcus rigged litter from branches and their jackets, loaded Thompson carefully, prepared to carry him back to American lines, 4 miles through hostile territory, with Germans active, with wounded man needing constant care. The mission was nearly impossible, but they'd try, had to try. Brotherhood demanded it. That's when German machine gun opened fire again. They weren't gone, they'd been waiting, watching, letting Americans expose themselves. Classic Wehrmacht tactics. Let rescue attempt draw targets into open, then kill everyone. The burst was perfectly aimed. Henderson went down immediately, hit in leg. Femur shattered. Marcus took rounds to shoulder. Chen's radio exploded. Hayes felt something hit his left side, burn like fire. He was hit. Not bad, but hit, blood soaking through jacket. They scattered again. Took cover, returned fire desperately. Situation was now critical. 2 more men wounded. Thompson still needed evacuation. Germans had them pinned again, and Hayes realized with sick certainty that Germans were herding them, driving them towards something. Another trap, another killing ground. Wehrmacht was very good at this, very experienced, very professional. Americans were outmatched, outgunned, out of options. "We can't stay here," Hayes gasped. Side hurt, blood loss making him light-headed. "We need to move, now." "Where?" Chen asked desperately. "Germans have us boxed. Any direction we go, they're there." Hayes thought frantically, tried to remember terrain, remember local features, remember anything that might save them. And then it came to him. The old mining tunnel, about 400 yards north. Abandoned coal mine from before war, shored up, dry, deep. Hayes had seen it weeks ago during different patrol, had filed it away as potential defensive position. If they could reach it, they could hide, could wait out Germans, could call for help once immediate threat passed. It was slim chance, but better than zero. "Mining tunnel," Hayes said, 400 yards north. "Follow me." They moved, carrying Thompson on litter, helping Henderson hop on one leg, supporting Marcus. 5 men moving through hostile territory, wounded, exhausted. Out of options, German fire followed them. Bullets cracked past, hit trees, kicked up snow, but they kept moving, kept surviving somehow, kept believing they might make it. Brotherhood pushed them forward, refused to quit, refused to leave anyone behind. 400 yards had never felt longer. They found tunnel entrance. hidden by brush and snow accumulation, exactly where Hayes remembered. They pushed inside, collapsed in darkness. Safe temporarily, the tunnel entrance was narrow, easily defended. Germans couldn't rush them, would have to come single file. That gave Hayes's tiny force advantage, small advantage, but better than being caught in open, better than certain death, better than nothing. Mitchell worked on Thompson immediately in dim light filtering through entrance, used remaining medical supplies. Thompson was still alive, still breathing, but barely. Wounds were severe, needed surgery soon, needed blood transfusions, needed real hospital with doctors and equipment. Without those, Thompson would die within 24 hours. They needed evacuation, needed help desperately. But Chen's radio was destroyed. They had no communication, no way to call for extraction, were trapped, isolated, cut off from friendly forces. Just 5 wounded soldiers in dark tunnel with Germans outside. Now what? Marcus asked, holding wounded shoulder, trying not to show pain. But Hayes saw it clearly. We wait, Hayes said. We defend. We survive. Someone will come for us. But would they? Battalion thought 4th Platoon was destroyed, had ordered withdrawal, assumed everyone was dead, might not even look for survivors, might write them off completely, might leave them here to die slowly from wounds or exposure or starvation. Hayes pushed that thought away violently. Had to believe, had to hope, had to think rescue would come, otherwise despair would kill them faster than Germans. Had to maintain belief, had to keep everyone focused on surviving, on waiting, on making it through. That was his job now. Keep these 5 men alive. Get them home somehow. Fulfill at least part of his promises. Hours passed slowly. German activity continued outside. Hayes could hear them. Moving around, searching, trying to locate tunnel entrance exactly, trying to finish job. But they couldn't find it. Brush and snow hid it too well. Eventually German voices faded, moved away. Either they'd given up searching or they'd positioned sentries to wait. Either way, Hayes' group was temporarily safe. Trapped, but safe. That was something. Night fell. Temperature dropped dramatically. Tunnel grew colder. Thompson was getting worse. Mitchell had used most medical supplies, had done everything possible with limited resources, but Thompson needed real hospital, needed blood, needed surgery. Without those, he'd die within hours. They needed rescue, soon, or one survivor would become 0. Hayes watched Thompson struggle to breathe, watched color drain from his face, watched life slipping away. After everything, after surviving ambush, after getting this far, Thompson was dying anyway. The unfairness was crushing. Morning came. January 9th, 23 hours since ambush. Hayes crawled to tunnel entrance, looked out carefully. Dawn light showed German positions. Machine gun nest on ridge. Patrol patterns established. Wehrmacht had them contained efficiently. Were waiting for Americans to make mistake, to try escaping. Then they'd finish them. Hayes counted enemy soldiers visible. At least 20, maybe more, against his 5 wounded men. Odds were impossible, absolutely impossible. Battalion had written them off. Command had ordered withdrawal. Nobody was coming. If Hayes wanted to save his men, he'd have to do it himself. Would have to fight through Germans, carry wounded, navigate 4 miles of hostile territory back to American lines, with no radio, no support, no help. Just 5 wounded soldiers against 20 Germans. Mathematics said impossible. Common sense said forget it. Survival instinct said hide and hope. But Brotherhood said try anyway. Said these men deserved chance. Said promises mattered more than odds. Hayes explained plan to his survivors. They'd wait until nightfall, then attempt breakout. Move under darkness. Use confusion to slip past German positions. It was risky, probably fatal, but staying meant certain death. Thompson would die. then probably rest from wounds or exposure. Moving gave them chance. Small chance. Microscopic chance. But more than zero, that had to be enough. Had to matter. Had to be worth trying. "We're with you, Sarge," Chen said quietly. Others nodded agreement. These men, these soldiers, still trusting him after everything. After he'd led them into ambush. After 12 friends had died. After promising safety he couldn't deliver. They still believed, still followed, still thought he could get them home. That trust was heavy, was crushing, was responsibility that made Hayes want to scream, but also gift. These men hadn't given up, hadn't turned on him, hadn't blamed him for disaster. They believed he'd honor that belief, would die trying if necessary, would get them home or die in the attempt. That was promise, that was obligation, that was brotherhood. Day passed in tense silence. Thompson's breathing got worse, shallow, wet-sounding. Mitchell looked increasingly worried. Time was running out fast. Hayes cleaned his Thompson mechanically, counted ammunition one more time. 15 rounds remaining. 15 bullets to get 5 men through 20 Germans. The mathematics was laughable, but mathematics didn't account for desperation, didn't measure brotherhood, didn't understand that sometimes impossible odds were just obstacles to overcome rather than reasons to quit. 30 minutes before scheduled breakout, Hayes heard American voices outside, distant, calling. Someone was out there. Someone was looking. Someone had come. Hayes' heart leaped. He moved to tunnel entrance, looked out carefully, saw 4 American soldiers moving through forest, searching, calling names, looking for survivors. Battalion hadn't written them off completely. Someone had organized rescue mission. Someone was looking. Someone cared. Hayes recognized lead soldier immediately. Sergeant Kowalski from 2nd Platoon. Good man. Experienced combat sergeant. Solid reputation. He'd volunteered for this. Had come into hostile territory, risking his life to find Hayes's men. Brotherhood in action. Soldiers looking after soldiers. Everything good about army. Everything worth fighting for. Everything Hayes believed in seeing his own beliefs reflected back. "Kowalski," Hayes called out. Not too loud. Germans might hear, but loud enough to carry. "Over here." Kowalski spun toward voice, saw tunnel entrance partially hidden by brush. His face showed relief mixed with determination. He moved quickly, brought his 3 volunteers, reached tunnel, looked at Hayes's wounded group, at Thompson barely breathing, at Henderson and Marcus with their wounds, at exhaustion and trauma and desperation. Kowalski's expression was grim but unsurprised. He'd expected bad. This met expectations. "Battalion said you were all dead," Kowalski said quietly. Said 4th Platoon was wiped out. Total loss. "But I knew you, Hayes. Knew if anyone survived, you'd find a way. Knew you wouldn't leave your men. Brought stretchers. Brought morphine. Brought hope. Let's get you home, brother." They moved Thompson onto proper litter, gave him fresh morphine injection, treated Henderson's shattered leg properly, bandaged Marcus's shoulder wounds professionally, strengthened Hayes's side bandage. Then they moved out. 8 American soldiers now, carrying 1 critical casualty, supporting 2 walking wounded, moving through German territory in daylight, risking everything. Germans spotted them quickly. Opened fire immediately. Bullets everywhere. The group ran, carried Thompson, supported each other, returned fire when necessary. Just kept moving, kept surviving, kept refusing to quit. German machine guns tracked them. Mortar rounds started falling. Artillery adjusted toward their position. Wehrmacht was throwing everything at them, trying to finish job, trying to kill survivors and rescuers both. But Americans kept moving. Brotherhood drove them. Refused to leave anyone behind. Refused to accept defeat. Refused to let Germans win. They made 4 miles through hostile territory, reached American lines, collapsed behind friendly positions, safe, Finally safe, after 24 hours of horror, Thompson made it to Field Hospital. Emergency surgery saved his life. Doctors said another hour would have been fatal. Henderson's leg was saved. Full recovery expected in 6 months. Marcus's shoulder healed perfectly. No permanent damage. Chen and Mitchell continued serving, survived war, went home to families. And Hayes carried 12 dog tags for the rest of his life. Visited 12 families after war ended. Told them how their sons had died, how they'd fought bravely, how Hayes wished he'd saved them. Carried that burden until death. But he also carried something else. Memory of 4 men refusing to abandon him, of Kowalski risking everything to rescue survivors, of Brotherhood defying orders and odds and logic. That was what soldiers did. They looked after each other, never left anyone behind, fought impossible odds because brothers were worth fighting for. That lesson shaped Hayes, defined him, made him understand what really mattered in war. Not tactics or victories or medals, but keeping faith with brothers, honoring bonds that went deeper than regulations. That was valor. That was victory. That was everything. Years later, people asked Hayes about war, about combat experiences, about what mattered most. He'd tell them about January 9th, 1945, about being trapped in tunnel with wounded men, about certain death, about Kowalski appearing like miracle, about 8 men carrying 1 survivor through German territory, about brotherhood being stronger than fear or odds or rational calculation. That was his war story. That was his truth. That was what he wanted people to understand about soldiers. The army gave Hayes medals, Bronze Star for valor, Purple Heart for his wound. He accepted them politely but didn't care. What mattered was Thompson survived, Henderson and Marcus recovered, Chen and Mitchell came home. 5 men lived because Brotherhood refused to accept defeat. That was victory. That was everything. Not tactical outcome, not strategic objective, but bringing brothers home, keeping promises, even when promises seemed impossible, honoring bonds that mattered more than life itself. Hayes stayed in army. After war, made it career. Retired as Sergeant Major in 1965, 25 years of service. Trained thousands of soldiers over decades, taught them tactics and weapons and survival skills, but mostly taught them about brotherhood, about never leaving anyone behind, about fighting for each other, about promises that transcended regulations, about bonds that made impossible missions achievable. That was his legacy. That was what mattered, teaching next generation that brotherhood wasn't optional, was mandatory, was what separated soldiers from just armed men. He died in 1987, 68 years old. Heart attack while gardening. Quick, painless. At his funeral, 5 old men appeared. Thompson, Henderson, Marcus, Chen, Mitchell, the men Hayes had saved 42 years earlier. The brothers who'd survived because promises were kept. They stood together at his grave in silence. Didn't speak, didn't need to. Their presence said everything. Brotherhood endured, promises kept, bonds unbroken by time or distance or even death. Thompson spoke briefly. Sergeant Hayes taught us what soldiers really are. Not just people who fight, but people who refuse to quit on each other, who keep promises when promises seem impossible, who believe brotherhood matters more than odds. He saved my life twice. Once in that tunnel, again by showing me what it means to be soldier, to be brother, to be man worth following. Rest easy, Sarge. We'll take it from here. That was Hayes's legacy. Not battles or medals or tactical victories, but men who lived because he refused to accept defeat, who came home because promises were sacred, who understood that some bonds transcend everything else, that brotherhood matters, that soldiers look after soldiers, that no one gets left behind regardless of cost or risk or odds. That lesson outlived Hayes, lived in men he saved, in soldiers he trained, in story that got told and retold about Sergeant who believed brotherhood was mandatory, not optional. And in Belgium forest near old mining tunnel memorial marker was placed. 6 dog tags hung from shattered pine branch. Names etched in stone. 12 men who died. 5 who lived. 1 sergeant who understood. The marker read, 4th Platoon. January 8th, 1945. 12 fell, 5 survived. Brotherhood never surrendered, never forgotten, never forsaken. That was Hayes's war. That was his gift. That was truth written in blood and snow and promises kept against impossible odds. Mathematics said, forget them. Command said, write them off. Logic said, accept defeat. But Brotherhood said, never. Said, fight anyway. Said, promises matter more than odds. And on January 9th, 1945, Brotherhood won. Not through superior tactics or firepower or numerical advantage, but through 8 soldiers refusing to leave 5 behind, through Kowalski risking everything, through Hayes keeping promises even when promises meant probable death, through soldiers believing in something larger than self-preservation. That was valor in its truest form, not charging machine guns or taking objectives, but refusing to abandon brothers, fighting impossible odds because someone was worth fighting for, keeping faith when faith seemed stupid, honoring bonds when bonds seemed suicidal. That was what separated soldiers from just armed men. That distinction mattered, defined everything, explained why veterans carried certain memories forever, why some stories got told repeatedly, why brotherhood remained sacred concept decades after battles ended. Hayes understood that, lived it, taught it, made it his life's work ensuring next generation learned, same lesson, that soldiers weren't just individuals with weapons, were family, were brothers, were bonds that transcended normal relationships. In combat, men learned to trust completely, to rely absolutely, to value each other's lives above their own. That was sacred, was beautiful in harsh way, was worth preserving and teaching and honoring. 4th Platoon demonstrated that lesson perfectly. 12 men died, but 5 lived, and that 5 lived because 12 others refused to accept their deaths, because Brotherhood demanded rescue attempt, even when mathematics said impossible, because promises mattered, because bonds were real, because soldiers don't abandon soldiers, ever, regardless of cost. That was lesson. That was truth. That was what Hayes wanted engraved on his tombstone and written in history and taught to every soldier forever. The story spread through veterans' networks over decades, became teaching case at infantry schools, example of leadership under impossible circumstances, of brotherhood overcoming tactical disaster, of promises kept when keeping promises meant probable death. Military instructors used 4th Platoon as example, told story to new soldiers, explained why brotherhood mattered, why you never leave anyone behind, why some obligations transcend rational calculation. The story became legend, became inspiration, became proof that best of humanity survives even in worst of circumstances. Thompson lived until 2003, 79 years old, raised 3 kids, built successful farm in Kansas. Every year on January 9th, he'd call Hayes. Later, after Hayes died, he'd visit the grave, place dog tags on headstone, 12 sets representing the men who didn't make it, stand in silence remembering, honoring, ensuring nobody forgot. Thompson knew he'd lived on borrowed time, knew he should have died in that forest, knew he existed only because Hayes refused to quit. That knowledge shaped his life, made him better father, better husband, better man. He lived for 12 men who couldn't, honored their memory by living well. That was his obligation, his promise, his way of saying thank you to ghosts and to Hayes and to brotherhood that transcended death. Henderson became high school teacher, taught history, told 4th Platoon story every year to students, made them understand what soldiers really were, not just people with guns but people with unbreakable bonds, people who valued each other above themselves, People who kept promises when promises seemed insane. Students would ask if he was scared that day. Henderson would say yes, terrified. But fear didn't matter. Brotherhood mattered. Promises mattered. Doing right thing even when right thing was suicidal mattered. That was lesson he wanted them learning. Not about tactics or weapons, but about human bonds at their strongest. Marcus became police officer, served 30 years, retired as captain. He'd tell fellow officers about Hayes, about being wounded and trapped and certain he'd die, about Hayes refusing to leave him, about Kowalski risking everything, about 8 men carrying 5 through hell because abandonment wasn't option. That story shaped how Marcus did law enforcement. Never left partners in danger. Always backed up fellow officers, always remembered that badges created brotherhood similar to soldiers. Different context, but same principle. You don't abandon your people, ever. That was rule. That was sacred. That was what Hayes taught him in Belgium forest. Chen and Mitchell stayed friends after war, lived near each other in California, got together every January 9th, drank to 4th Platoon, remembered 12 who died, honored Hayes who saved them, talked about brotherhood and promises and what it meant to be soldier. They'd discuss how lucky they were, how easily they could have died with the others, how Hayes's decision to go back had saved them, how Kowalski's decision to organize rescue had changed everything, how brotherhood had triumphed over mathematics and logic and common sense. Those discussions were sacred, were ritual, were a way of ensuring memory survived, of keeping faith with ghosts, of honoring bonds that death couldn't break. All 5 survivors outlived Hayes, all attended his funeral in 1987, all spoke about what he meant, about lessons learned, about debts owed, about brotherhood that defined their understanding of what humans could be at their best. Their words weren't flowery or dramatic, just simple truth. Hayes had saved them, had kept promises, had shown them what soldiers really were. That was enough, was everything, was legacy worth having. The funeral took place on cold March day in Chicago. Hayes had moved back to his hometown after retirement, lived quiet life, kept to himself mostly, but military community knew him, respected him. Hundreds of veterans attended the service, filled the church, stood outside in respectful silence. From all wars, Korea, Vietnam, some from World War II, all came to honor Sergeant, who taught them what brotherhood meant. Thompson spoke first at the service. He was 75 years old now, still strong, still healthy despite wounds that should have killed him 42 years earlier. He stood at podium and looked at Hayes's flag-draped coffin, took deep breath, began speaking. "Sergeant Hayes saved my life twice," Thompson said. "First time was January 9th, 1945. I was dying in snow in Belgium. 4th Platoon had been ambushed. 12 men were dead. I was next. But Hayes came back, disobeyed orders, risked his life, found me, carried me out. That was first time he saved me." Thompson paused, gathered himself, continued. "Second time was every day after, because Hayes showed me what it means to be man worth saving, what it means to honor those who died by living well, what it means to keep promises, even when promises seem impossible. He taught me about brotherhood, about sacrifice, about obligations that transcend self-interest. That lesson saved me from becoming bitter, from wasting the life he'd risked everything to preserve. I lived for 12 men who couldn't, honored their memory by being good father, good husband, good citizen. That was Hayes's second gift. Not just life, but understanding of what life meant and how to live it right." Henderson spoke next. He was 73, retired teacher, respected in community. His words were measured, thoughtful. "Hayes taught me about courage," Henderson said. "Not the loud kind, not charging machine guns kind. The quiet courage of keeping promises when keeping them means probable death. The courage of going back for your men when everyone says they're lost. The courage of believing brotherhood matters more than mathematics. That's real courage. That's what Hayes demonstrated. And that's what he taught thousands of soldiers over 25 years of service. Don't abandon your people. Keep your promises. Brotherhood is mandatory. Those lessons shaped me as teacher, shaped how I thought about students and community and obligations to others. Hayes' courage echoed through my life and through lives of everyone he touched. Marcus spoke third, 74 years old, former police captain. His voice was strong, certain. Hayes showed me what leadership really is, Marcus said. Not giving orders from safe positions, but leading from front, sharing danger, refusing to ask anything of your people you wouldn't do yourself. When 4th Platoon was destroyed, Hayes didn't save himself. He went back, tried to save his men, failed to save 12, succeeded with 5. But the trying was what mattered. The refusal to abandon, the keeping faith even when faith seemed stupid. That's leadership. That's what I tried to emulate in 30 years of police work. Never leave partners in danger. Always back up your people. Always remember that leading means serving. Hayes taught me that, showed me that, made me better leader by his example. Chen spoke fourth, 75. Retired businessman. Successful. Prosperous, but humble despite success. Hayes gave me my life back, Chen said simply. January 8th, 1945. I thought I'd die in Belgium forest. Thought I'd never see California again. Never marry Nancy. Never raise my children. Never build my business. Never have any of the life I'd planned. But Hayes refused to accept that. Went back when Battalion said, "Forget it. Found survivors. Got us home. Everything I've done since marriage, children, business, community service. All of it exists because Hayes kept promises, because brotherhood mattered to him, because he believed soldiers don't abandon soldiers. I've tried to live worthy of that gift, tried to honor the 12 who didn't make it, tried to be man worth saving. That's been my mission for 42 years. That's my remaining promise to Hayes and to 4th Platoon." Mitchell spoke last, 76 years old, retired pharmacist. He'd gone back to family business after war, served community quietly for decades. His voice shook with emotion. "Hayes trusted me with his men's lives," Mitchell said. "As platoon medic, I was responsible for keeping wounded soldiers alive. Hayes gave me that authority, that trust. When we were trapped in tunnel with Thompson dying, Hayes never questioned my judgment, never doubted my abilities, just supported me, believed in me, gave me everything I needed to do my job. That trust was gift, was responsibility I carried seriously. After war, I became pharmacist like my father, spent 50 years helping people. Every prescription I filled, I thought about Hayes, about trust, about responsibility, about how belief in someone's abilities makes them rise to meet that belief. Hayes made me better medic, by trusting me completely, made me better pharmacist, by same principle. His legacy isn't just 5 soldiers saved, it's thousands of lives touched by men he shaped. That's real immortality." After service, 5 survivors stood together at graveside, watched Hayes's coffin lowered into ground, rendered final salutes, stood in silence remembering. 42 years had passed since Belgium, since ambush, since tunnel, since impossible rescue, but memory remained fresh, pain remained real, gratitude remained immeasurable. Hayes had given them decades of life, wives and children and grandchildren, careers and communities and legacies, all possible because one sergeant refused to quit, refused to abandon, refused to accept mathematics over brotherhood. Thompson placed 12 dog tags on fresh grave, the ones Hayes had carried since 1945, Private Williams, Corporal Davis, Private Anderson, Private Torres, Private Morrison, Private Johnson, 6 others, 12 names, 12 soldiers who died trusting Hayes. Hayes had carried them faithfully for 42 years. Now they'd rest together, sergeant and soldiers, commander and men, brothers forever. Rest easy, Sarge, Thompson said quietly. Mission complete, promise kept. We'll take it from here. 5 old men walked away from grave. They'd gather again next year, January 9th. Annual memorial, honor 4th Platoon. Remember 12 who died. Remember Hayes who saved them. Remember brotherhood that transcended death. That was tradition. That was obligation. That was how they kept faith with ghosts. Hayes's story didn't end with his death. Story continued spreading, reached new generations, became teaching tool in military academies and infantry schools. Instructors would tell 4th Platoon's story to young soldiers, explain why it mattered, why brotherhood was mandatory, why you never leave anyone behind, why promises transcend mathematics. At West Point, Captain Morrison taught leadership course. She used Hayes as case study, would ask cadets what they'd have done. Go back for soldiers? Risk lives of survivors for slim chance of finding wounded? Obey battalion orders to withdraw? The discussions were heated, passionate, revealing. Some cadets argued Hayes was reckless, risked 4 men for vague possibility of survivors. Others argued Hayes was heroic, honored obligations that defined what soldiers were. Both positions had merit. Both revealed truths about leadership and responsibility, and impossible choices. Hayes teaches us that leadership isn't just tactics, Morrison would explain. It's understanding what motivates soldiers, what bonds them, what makes them follow you into hell. Hayes' men followed him because he'd proven he wouldn't abandon them. That trust was earned, was sacred. When he went back, 4 survivors followed, disobeyed orders, risked lives, because brotherhood mattered more than regulations. That's what Hayes created, through months of competent leadership. That's what saved 5 men in tunnel, not tactics, not firepower, but trust and brotherhood, and promises that meant something. At infantry school, Sergeant Major Williams taught young sergeants about Hayes, about what it meant to be non-commissioned officer, about responsibilities that came with stripes, about obligations to soldiers under your command. He'd describe ambush in detail, 12 dead, 4 survivors, Hayes's choice, battalion's orders, the impossible situation. Then he'd ask question, what matters more, following orders or keeping promises to your men? The question had no easy answer. Both mattered, both were important, but sometimes they conflicted. Sometimes you had to choose. Hayes chose promises, chose brotherhood, chose going back. That choice saved 5 lives, but also violated orders, put survivors at additional risk, could have gotten everyone killed. Was it right choice? Williams never answered definitively. Let sergeants wrestle with ambiguity. Let them understand that leadership meant making impossible choices and living with consequences. Hayes lived with his choice, Williams would say, carried 12 dog tags for 42 years, visited 12 families, told them about their sons, accepted responsibility for deaths, but also took pride in 5 survivors, in promises kept, in brotherhood honored. That's what being sergeant means, accepting weight of both success and failure, understanding that you'll make mistakes that kill soldiers, but trying anyway, keeping promises anyway, honoring obligations anyway, because that's what separates good sergeants from bad ones. Not perfection, but dedication, but caring, but refusing to quit on your people. Thompson's annual January 9th memorial grew over years, started with 5 survivors, eventually included families, children, grandchildren, other 4th Platoon veterans who hadn't been on that patrol, friends, fellow soldiers, community members. By 1995, 50 people attended. By 2080, the memorial became tradition, became important, became way community honored sacrifice and brotherhood, and promises kept. Thompson would speak briefly each year, tell story, make sure younger generation understood, make sure memory survived. make sure lessons weren't lost. His words varied but message stayed constant. Brotherhood matters. Promises matter. You don't abandon your people. Those principles transcended military context, applied to families and communities and societies, applied everywhere humans formed bonds and made commitments and relied on each other. My grandfather was 4th Platoon. Thompson's grandson would eventually say, he taught me about Hayes, about brotherhood, about keeping promises even when keeping them seems impossible. Those lessons shaped how I live, how I treat people, how I think about obligations. Grandfather died in 2003, but lessons survive, stories survive, and every January 9th, we remember. We honor, we ensure nobody forgets what Hayes and 4th Platoon taught us about being human at our best. The Military Museum in Chicago eventually created 4th Platoon exhibit, displayed Hayes's uniform, his medals, his dog tags, the 12 sets he'd carried, photographs from Belgium, maps showing ambush site and tunnel location and rescue route, detailed explanations of events, audio recordings of Thompson and others describing experiences. The exhibit became popular, attracted thousands of visitors annually. School groups, military families, veterans, history enthusiasts, all came to learn about one day in Belgium when Brotherhood triumphed over mathematics. Museum hired veteran to serve as exhibit curator. Sergeant First Class Jackson retired after 25 years. He'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan, had experienced his own impossible situations, his own brotherhood moments. He understood Hayes's story personally, would give tours, answer questions, help visitors grasp significance. 4th Platoon teaches us about loyalty. Jackson would explain, not abstract loyalty to nation or flag or ideology, but concrete loyalty to person beside you, soldier next to you in foxhole, brother depending on you in crisis. That loyalty is real, is tangible, is what makes military units function. Hayes understood that, built that loyalty through months of competent leadership. When crisis came, that loyalty saved lives. 4 men followed Hayes back into danger. Kowalski organized rescue mission, all because bonds were real, were strong, were worth dying for. School groups would ask questions. Why did Hayes go back? Because promises mattered. Why did others follow? Because brotherhood was real. Why did Kowalski risk everything? Because soldiers don't abandon soldiers. The answers were simple, were fundamental, were truths that transcended historical specifics and applied to all human relationships built on trust and mutual obligation. You can apply these lessons everywhere, Jackson would tell students. Sports teams, businesses, families, communities, anywhere people depend on each other and make commitments and build trust. Brotherhood isn't just military concept, it's human concept. It's what happens when people refuse to abandon each other, when promises mean something, when bonds transcend self-interest. Hayes showed us that. 4th Platoon proved it. And that's why this story matters 50 years later, not because it's military history, but because it's human truth. The story reached Hollywood eventually. Producers wanted to make movie, 5th Platoon they'd call it, change names, dramatize events, add love interests and battle scenes and dramatic speeches. Thompson and surviving family members refused permission, didn't want story commodified, didn't want truth sacrificed for entertainment. Story was sacred, was real, was about actual men who'd actually died and actually survived, not material for popcorn consumption and box office calculations. Hayes wouldn't want movie, Thompson told producers. He'd want lessons remembered, want principles honored, want next generation understanding what brotherhood means. You can't capture that in 2-hour film, can't reduce it to entertainment. Story belongs to soldiers and their families, belongs to communities they served, belongs to memory and honor and respect, not to Hollywood. Producers respected that decision. Story remained in museums and military schools and annual memorials, remained sacred, remained real, remained what it should be, testament to human capacity for sacrifice and loyalty, and keeping faith with brothers. By 2010, only Marcus remained alive from original 5 survivors. He was 94, frail but determined, still attended January 9th memorial, still told story, still ensured memory survived. His health was failing. He knew he wouldn't last much longer, but he had mission, had obligation, had to keep faith until he physically couldn't anymore. "I'm last one left," Marcus told gathering at 2010 memorial. Thompson died in 2003, Henderson in 2005, Chen in 2007, Mitchell in 2008. Now just me, last connection to that day in Belgium, last person who was there, who saw Hayes refuse to quit, who experienced what brotherhood really means. So I'll keep telling story, keep honoring promises, keep making sure you all understand what Hayes and 4th Platoon taught us. That's my final duty, my last obligation to brothers who saved me. Marcus died in 2011, 95 years old, peacefully in sleep. At his funeral, 4th Platoon Memorial was present. Photographs, uniforms, dog tags, story. His grandson spoke about Marcus's dedication, about 66 years of honoring promises, about brotherhood that lasted lifetime, about lessons passed to new generation. "Grandfather made me promise to continue memorial," grandson said, "to keep January 9th tradition alive, to ensure 4th Platoon isn't forgotten. I'll honor that promise. We'll teach my children, we'll pass it forward, because that's what Hayes and 4th Platoon taught us. Promises matter. Brotherhood matters. Memory matters. Those lessons don't die with individuals. They survive through communities and families and commitment to honoring those who came before." The memorial continues today, 75 years after events. Original survivors are all gone, but families remain. Communities remember, military honors. Each January 9th, people gather, tell stories, share memories, explain to children why this matters, why Hayes matters, why 4th Platoon matters, why brotherhood and promises and refusing to quit matters. The lessons remain relevant, remain important, remain truths that every generation needs learning. And in Belgium, the memorial marker still stands, maintained by local community, visited by tourists and military personnel, and anyone interested in understanding what soldiers really are. 6 dog tags still hang from branch, 12 names still etched in stone. Brief inscription still reads, 4th Platoon, January 8th, 1945. 12 fell, 5 survived. Brotherhood never surrendered, never forgotten, never forsaken. That was Hayes's truth. That was 4th Platoon's lesson. That was what mattered then and matters now, and will matter forever. Brotherhood, loyalty, promises, refusing to abandon, keeping faith. Those aren't just military values. They're human values. They're what we aspire to be, what we honor in others, what we try to teach our children. Hayes lived them. 4th Platoon demonstrated them. And that's why story survives, why it matters, why it's worth remembering and retelling and ensuring next generation understands. Mathematics said abandon them. Logic said accept defeat. Orders said withdraw. But brotherhood said never, said fight anyway, said promises matter more than calculations. And on January 9th, 1945, brotherhood won. That victory wasn't tactical or strategic, was moral, was human, was demonstration that best of who we are survives even in worse circumstances. That was Hayes's gift. That was 4th Platoon's legacy. That was truth worth carrying forward forever. Brotherhood mandatory, always, no exceptions, no matter what. The lessons from 4th Platoon reached beyond military context, reached into civilian life, into communities, into families, into anywhere humans formed bonds and made commitments to each other. The principles Hayes demonstrated weren't uniquely military, were universally human, about loyalty, about keeping promises, about refusing to abandon people depending on you. Those lessons applied everywhere. Business leaders studied 4th Platoon, learned about building trust, about creating loyalty, about what happens when teams truly believe in each other. Hayes had built that trust through competent leadership, through months of keeping his men safe, through demonstrating daily that he valued their lives above glory or advancement. When crisis came, that trust paid dividends. 4 men followed him into death zone, not because ordered to, because bonds were real, were strong, were worth dying for. That level of commitment couldn't be manufactured or commanded, had to be earned through consistent demonstration of character and commitment to team over self. Athletic coaches used Hayes as example, talked about team building, about creating bonds that transcended individual interests, about what happens when players truly trust coach and each other. Championship teams weren't built on talent alone, were built on bonds, on loyalty, on refusal to quit on each other even when situations seemed hopeless. 4th Platoon demonstrated that principle perfectly. 5 wounded soldiers escaping through German lines because 8 men refused to abandon them. That was team, that was bond, that was what made impossible things possible. Teachers used 4th Platoon in ethics classes, discussed moral obligations, competing duties, impossible choices. Hayes had faced classic ethical dilemma: obey orders or keep promises, save certain 4 or risk all for possible 5, follow regulations or follow conscience. The dilemma had no perfect answer. Both choices had merit. Both involved sacrifice. Hayes chose promises over orders, chose brotherhood over regulations. That choice worked. 5 survived, but could have failed, could have gotten everyone killed. Students wrestled with ambiguity, learned that moral choices often involve uncertain outcomes and incomplete information and risk. That was valuable lesson. That was real ethics beyond abstract theories. Religious communities found spiritual truths in 4th Platoon's story about sacrifice, about love transcending self-interest, about keeping faith even unto death. Hayes's decision to go back embodied principles many faiths taught. Love thy neighbor. Greater love hath no man than lay down life for friends. Faith without works is dead. The story illustrated religious principles through concrete action, showed what faith looked like when tested by fire. That resonated deeply with communities built on shared values and mutual obligations. Mental health professionals studied 4th Platoon regarding post-traumatic growth. Hayes carried obvious trauma from those 12 deaths, visited families, told stories, accepted responsibility, but he also transformed trauma into purpose, into teaching next generation, into ensuring deaths had meaning through lessons passed forward. That was healthy trauma response. That was post-traumatic growth, taking terrible experience and extracting something valuable, something that helped others, something that gave meaning to suffering. Hayes demonstrated that possibility, showed that trauma could be carried without destroying carrier. That was an important lesson for veterans and first responders and anyone carrying difficult memories. The story influenced modern military training, emphasis on small unit cohesion, on building trust, on creating bonds that made soldiers fight for each other rather than just for abstract causes. Research showed soldiers fought primarily for brothers beside them, for squad mates, for men who depended on them and whom they depended on. 4th Platoon proved that research demonstrated that brotherhood was real force, was tactical advantage, was what made impossible missions achievable. Modern military invested heavily in building that cohesion, that trust, that brotherhood, because Hayes and 4th Platoon had proven it mattered, had proven it saved lives, had proven it was difference between success and catastrophe. Virtual reality technology eventually recreated 4th Platoon experience. Training simulation put soldiers in Hayes's position, made them experience ambush, made them decide whether to go back, made them feel weight of impossible choice. The simulation was brutal, was effective, taught lessons that lectures couldn't convey. Soldiers experienced what Hayes experienced, felt weight of responsibility, felt pull of competing obligations, felt terror of going back into kill zone. Most failed simulation initially, made wrong choices, got everyone killed, but learned from failure, tried again, eventually understood what Hayes understood, that some things mattered more than survival, that brotherhood was real, that promises were sacred. The simulation became standard training, became way of passing forward lessons that 4th Platoon had written in blood. International militaries studied 4th Platoon, translated story, taught it to their soldiers. Principles transcended nationality, transcended specific conflicts, were universal truths about soldiers and bonds and what made units effective. German military academies taught 4th Platoon, despite it being about defeating Germans, because lesson was valuable regardless of which side you were on. Brotherhood was brotherhood. Loyalty was loyalty. Principles applied universally. That was testament to story's power. That enemy could learn from it, could recognize truth it contained, could honor what it represented, even when it represented own defeat. The story reached popular culture eventually. Despite families' refusal of Hollywood, books were written, documentaries were made, podcasts discussed it, YouTube channels analyzed it. The story spread through modern media, reached new generations who'd never heard of 4th Platoon or Hayes or January 9th, 1945. Those generations learned lessons, understood principles, carried forward truth about brotherhood and loyalty, and keeping promises. That was important. That was how memory survived, how lessons reached people who needed them, how truth transcended original context and became permanent part of human knowledge. Some criticized Hayes's decision, said he was reckless, said he should have obeyed orders, said he risked 4 lives for slim possibility of finding survivors. Those criticisms had merit. Hayes did violate orders, did put survivors at risk, could have gotten everyone killed, but he also saved 5 lives. Found Thompson, got everyone home, kept promises, demonstrated that brotherhood was real. Those results mattered. Those outcomes validated his choice. Not perfectly. War offered no perfect choices, but Hayes's decision worked. That was historical fact. 5 survived. That was truth that couldn't be argued away. Others elevated Hayes to unrealistic hero status, made him flawless, made him perfect leader who never made mistakes. That was equally wrong. Hayes made mistakes, led platoon into ambush, failed to spot trap, got 12 men killed, carried that burden forever. He wasn't perfect, was human, was soldier trying his best in impossible circumstances. That humanity was important, that imperfection made him relatable, made his courage more impressive. Perfect heroes were inspirational but distant. Flawed humans doing heroic things despite fear and doubt were encouraging, were proof that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when circumstances demanded. The balanced truth about Hayes was most valuable. He was competent sergeant who made mistake that killed 12 men, but refused to abandon survivors. Kept promises despite impossible odds. Demonstrated brotherhood meant something. Saved 5 lives through courage and determination and refusal to quit. He was neither saint nor reckless. Was soldier who faced terrible situation and did his best, made hard choice and lived with consequences. That was real. That was honest. That was truth worth honoring and remembering and teaching. 75 years after 4th Platoon, principles remain relevant. Brotherhood still matters. Promises still count. Refusing to abandon people still defines good character. Those truths transcend era and technology and specific circumstances, are permanent parts of what makes humans human. What makes communities function. What makes life meaningful beyond mere survival. Hayes and 4th Platoon taught those lessons, demonstrated those truths, proved those principles through action. That was their gift. That was their legacy. That was why story survives and matters, and continues teaching new generations. In final analysis, 4th Platoon wasn't primarily about tactics or combat or military history. It was about human relationships at their strongest, about bonds that transcended self-interest, about loyalty tested by fire and proven genuine, about promises kept when keeping them seemed impossible, about refusing to abandon people depending on you. Hayes understood that, lived it, taught it, made it his life's work, ensuring next generation learned same lessons, that soldiers were brotherhood, were bonds deeper than normal relationships, were family forged through shared danger and mutual trust. That bond was sacred, was worth preserving across generations. 4th Platoon demonstrated that bond perfectly. 12 men died, but deaths weren't meaningless. Taught lesson that saved 5 lives and influenced thousands more. That meaning mattered. That legacy counted. That was how soldiers achieved immortality, through lessons they taught and lives they touched and principles they demonstrated. So every January 9th, people gather in Chicago, in Belgium, across America. They remember 4th Platoon, remember Hayes and 12 who died and 5 who survived, tell stories, share memories, ensure next generation understands, ensure lessons survive. That's tradition, that's obligation, that's how faith is kept. In Belgium forest, memorial marker stands eternal. 6 dog tags hanging, 12 names etched, brief inscription, never forgotten, never forsaken. That promise is kept, that faith is maintained, that brotherhood endures 75 years later, forever. Because some truths transcend time, some lessons remain permanently relevant, some bonds never break. Mathematics said, abandon them. Logic said, accept defeat. Orders said, withdraw. But brotherhood said, never. And brotherhood won. That victory echoes still, in every soldier who refuses to quit, in every person who keeps promises despite impossible odds. That's Hayes's legacy. That's 4th Platoon's gift. Brotherhood mandatory, always, without exception. 6 dog tags on pine branch, 12 names in stone, 5 survivors who lived decades because promises were kept, 1 sergeant who understood brotherhood. That was 4th Platoon. That was everything. The story of 4th Platoon entered military folklore, became inspiration during subsequent wars. Korean War veterans heard it. Vietnam veterans told it to each other. Iraq and Afghanistan soldiers learned it in training. The specifics changed. Names got confused. Details became uncertain. But core message remained. Brotherhood matters. Promises matter. You don't leave people behind. Even when mathematics says quit. Even when logic says accept defeat. Even when survival odds are 0. You try anyway, because that's what soldiers do. Because bonds matter more than calculations. Because some things are worth dying for. That was Hayes's final gift to army he loved. Story that outlived him. Lesson that survived decades. Proof that brotherhood wasn't just word but real force that changed outcomes and saved lives and made impossible missions succeed. 4th Platoon proved it. 12 died. 5 lived. Not through luck or superior tactics, but through 8 soldiers refusing to abandon 5, through brotherhood triumphing over mathematics, through promises kept against impossible odds. And somewhere in Belgium, memorial marker still stands. 6 dog tags hanging, names etched in stone. 12 men, 5 survivors, 1 sergeant, 1 lesson. Brotherhood mandatory. Never optional, never forgotten. That was truth. That was Hayes's war. That was what mattered. Always had been. Always would be. Mathematics be damned.